conference room smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet, and my brother Marcus was already talking before he even sat down. He had his jacket pressed, his smile wide, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been wrong about yourself, not even once. He looked around that table like he owned it. He looked at the senior partners like they owed him something. He looked at me like I was furniture. And then he straightened his cuffs, leaned forward, and said the words that he had clearly been saving for an audience. He said he was the new partner. He said it was official. He said he had worked for this for years and now it was finally his moment. What Marcus did not know, what no one at that table except me and two lawyers knew, was that I had purchased the firm he was so proud to be joining. I had signed the papers 6 weeks earlier. My name was on the acquisition documents. His new partnership offer was mine to honor or void, and I had not decided yet which one I was going to do. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something real. If someone in your family spent years dismissing everything you built, minimizing every sacrifice you made, and then walked into the room you created and tried to claim it as their stage, what would you do? Would you correct them right there in front of everyone? Would you stay quiet and let them keep going? Or would you do what Ackles did and just wait for exactly the right moment to let the truth speak for itself? Stay with this story, because what happened next at that table and everything that came before it changed the way Ackles understood her family, her worth, and what she was actually owed. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet, and my brother Marcus was already talking before he even sat down. He had his jacket pressed, his smile wide, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been wrong about yourself, not even once. He looked around that table like he owned it. He looked at the senior partners like they owed him something. He looked at me like I was furniture. And then he straightened his cuffs, leaned forward, and said the words that he had clearly been saving for an audience. He said he was the new partner. He said it was official. He said he had worked for this for years and now it was finally his moment. What Marcus did not know, what no one at that table except me and two lawyers knew, was that I had purchased the firm he was so proud to be joining. I had signed the papers 6 weeks earlier. My name was on the acquisition documents. His new partnership offer was mine to honor or void, and I had not decided yet which one I was going to do. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something real. If someone in your family spent years dismissing everything you built, minimizing every sacrifice you made, and then walked into the room you created and tried to claim it as their stage, what would you do? Would you correct them right there in front of everyone? Would you stay quiet and let them keep going? Or would you do what Ackles did and just wait for exactly the right moment to let the truth speak for itself? Stay with this story, because what happened next at that table and everything that came before it changed the way Ackles understood her family, her worth, and what she was actually owed. Ackles was 34 years old when she bought Carver and Holt Consulting, and she did it quietly, the way she had learned to do most things in her life. No announcement, no celebration dinner, no phone call home to share the news. She signed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon in a small office on the 11th floor of a building downtown, shook hands with the two senior partners who were retiring, and then drove home alone, stopped at a grocery store, and made herself pasta for dinner. That was the whole occasion. That was how Ackles marked the biggest professional moment of her life. Not because she lacked pride in what she had done, but because she had learned, after 34 years of being the quiet one in a loud family, that announcing things early only gave people more time to find ways to diminish them. She had grown up in a house where her brother Marcus took up most of the air. Marcus was 4 years older than Ackles, and from the time she was old enough to understand family dynamics, it was clear that he had been assigned a role in their household and she had been assigned a different one. Marcus was the visible one. He was the one their father talked about at dinner, the one their mother worried about when things were not going well for him, the one whose professional setbacks became family emergencies and whose professional wins became family celebrations. Ackles was the one who handled things. She was the one who stayed calm when there was a crisis. She was the one who drove their mother to appointments and helped with the who's. And showed up when she said she would. She did not need a lot of recognition for that, or so she told herself for years. She told herself that being dependable was its own reward. She told herself that her family saw her even if they did not say it. She kept telling herself that until she ran out of ways to believe it. Their father, Raymond, had worked in finance consulting his entire career. He had spent 22 years at a mid-sized firm in the city, and he was proud of that world, proud of the culture of it, proud of the way certain rooms looked and certain meetings felt. When Raymond retired, he talked about the industry the way some people talk about a place they loved and had to leave too soon. He wanted someone to carry that forward. It was very clear from the time Marcus was in high school that Raymond had decided Marcus was that person. Not because Marcus had shown any particular talent for the work, but because Marcus was the son and Raymond was the kind of man who still believed certain things followed certain people naturally. Ackles had gone into consulting on her own terms, without her father's guidance and without anyone's roadmap. She had started as an analyst at a small firm right out of college, moved up through sheer competence, and spent the next 12 years building a reputation in the industry that had nothing to do with her last name and everything to do with her actual results. She was good at what she did. She was precise and thorough, and she understood how to see a business clearly, how to find what was not working and fix it without causing the kind of chaos that made clients panic. Her clients trusted her. Her colleagues respected her. Her professional life was solid in a way that her personal life, her family life specifically, never quite managed to be. Marcus had also entered consulting, following their father's footstep, or more accurately, following the path their father had spent years pointing at him like a flashlight. The difference between them was that Ackles had built her career by being extremely good at her work, and Marcus had built his career by being extremely good at being in the right rooms. He was charming. He was well-dressed. He told the right stories and laughed at the right moments and made senior people feel interesting when he was around them. Those were real skills. Ackles did not pretend they were not, but they were not the same as being able to actually do the work, and over the years as Ackles watched Marcus from a careful distance, she noticed a pattern. His projects always seemed to land just below excellent. His clients were satisfied but rarely raving. His promotions came from relationships, not results. None of this would have mattered to Ackles, not deeply, if Marcus had not spent years acting as though his path was the more impressive one. The comparison started small. A comment at a family dinner when Ackles was 27. Marcus had just been made a senior associate at his firm, and Raymond was visibly proud, and Marcus was holding court at the table about how significant the role was. And when Ackles mentioned a major client win she had just achieved, Marcus had nodded briefly and then said, "That's good, but you're still at a boutique, right?" The word boutique was not said neutrally. It was said the way people say words when they want the word itself to do the diminishing for them. Ackles had smiled and moved on. She noted it. She did not forget it. By the time Ackles was 30, the comparison had become a kind of background noise in her family. Raymond would ask about Marcus's projects with genuine curiosity and ask about Ackles's projects with polite interest, which is a completely different thing and felt completely different to receive. Their mother, Sylvia, was warmer and more genuine in her attention, but even she had absorbed the family's hierarchy of importance so thoroughly that she sometimes parroted things Raymond said about Marcus's career without realizing she was doing it. Ackles watched all of this with the calm, clear eyes of someone who has spent a long time learning how to see the people she loves without flinching. The year Ackles turned 32 was when the shift started to happen in ways she had not anticipated. She had been approached quietly by the two founding partners of Carver and Holt, a well-regarded mid-sized consulting firm with a solid client roster and a strong regional reputation. They were both in their late 60s, and they were thinking about the next chapter of their lives. They had watched Ackles's work for years, had actually tried to recruit her twice before. This time, the conversation was different. They were not offering her a job, they were asking if she would consider purchasing the firm, taking it forward as the principal owner and operator, continuing the culture they had built while growing it in the direction she saw fit. Ackles did not say yes immediately. She took 4 months to think about it. She reviewed the financials 3 times, hired an independent advisor, talked to the existing staff, spoke to key clients. She was thorough in a way that the retiring partners later said they had hoped for but had not entirely expected. She wanted to know what she was actually buying, not just the number on the page, but the health of the relationships, the quality of the work, the real challenges the firm was sitting on. What she found was a firm that was solid but understretched. It had good bones and conservative management and a client base that trusted it, but a leadership that had not taken a risk in 8 years. She saw exactly what she would do with it. She saw it clearly and completely, and she said yes. The acquisition process was handled privately, which was standard in a transaction of this type. The retiring partners had their reasons for discretion, mostly having to do with client confidence and staff continuity. Ackles had her own reasons, which were simpler. She had learned that announcing things early gave people time to get in the way. She told no one in her family. She told 2 colleagues she trusted completely. She signed the papers on that Tuesday in October, and she went home and made pasta and thought about what she was going to do next. What she did not know, and what she discovered 3 weeks after the signing, was that Marcus had also been in contact with Carver and Holt, not as a buyer. Marcus had been networking with one of the junior partners at the firm, a man named Derek Paulson, for about a year. Marcus had positioned himself as a strong candidate for a senior role if the firm ever expanded. He had not been told about the acquisition. None of the staff had. But Marcus had been building a relationship with Derek, and had recently been discussing a potential partnership offer in a new expanded practice area the firm was supposedly considering. Derek, who had not yet been briefed on the ownership change, had been moving this conversation forward in good faith, not knowing that the firm's ownership had just transferred to someone whose last name was the same as the man he was courting. Ackles found out about Marcus's conversations with Derek during her first round of confidential staff briefings, 2 weeks after the acquisition closed. Derek mentioned in passing that he had a promising external candidate he had been courting for a potential partnership expansion, and then he gave her the name. She kept her expression completely neutral. She said, "Thank you for letting me know, I'll take that under advisement." Derek left the meeting thinking she had not reacted at all. In fact, she had reacted significantly on the inside. But Ackles had spent 34 years learning how to not show the full weight of what she was carrying. She did not call Marcus that night. She did not tell her parents. She sat with the information for a few days and she thought carefully about what she actually wanted to do. Part of her wanted to call Derek immediately and shut the conversation down. Another part of her, the part that had watched Marcus take up space for her entire adult life, wanted to see how far he would take it on his own, how much credit he would claim, how large the story would get. Whether he would, as he always did, position himself as the most important person in a room that she had built. She chose to wait, not out of cruelty, not because she was setting a trap. She chose to wait because she was still in the middle of the transition, still briefing staff, still reviewing the client files, still making decisions about the firm's direction. Marcus's parallel storyline with Derek was a small thread in a very large project. She did not have the bandwidth to address it at that exact moment. She told herself she would handle it when the time came. And then, in the way that timing sometimes works when you have been patient for long enough, the time came all at once. It happened at what was supposed to be a routine internal meeting, the kind of meeting that Ackles was still keeping low-key while the ownership transition finalized with staff. The room had 9 people in it. The 2 retiring partners who were still involved in a limited consulting capacity during the handover, Derek, several senior staff, and Ackles seated near the head of the table with a folder in front of her. She had sent calendar invites from her new firm email address. Most staff had received the transition announcement by that point, though not all had processed it fully. The invites had come from her name and her new title, which was listed clearly as principal owner. Marcus arrived at that meeting uninvited. He arrived because Derek had told him there was an important meeting about the new practice expansion, and Marcus had assumed, in the way Marcus always assumed, that he was included in important things. He had dressed sharply. He had his best jacket, his best watch, the posture he always carried on. In TO rooms where he expected to be noticed. He walked in slightly late, which Ackles suspected was intentional because Marcus believed arriving slightly late to important meetings made you look busy rather than unprepared. He looked around the table and registered the assembled faces, and then he settled his gaze at the head of the table, saw Ackles sitting there, and for exactly 1 second his expression shifted before he reconstructed it. Then he smiled. Then he sat down at the only open chair, which was across from her. Then Derek leaned over and quietly congratulated him on what he was about to make official. And Marcus, misreading the entire room, interpreting Derek's words as confirmation that his partnership deal was about to be formalized, sat up straighter, looked around the table, and announced it. He said he was proud to be joining the firm as its newest partner. He said it had been a long road and he was ready to bring serious energy to the new direction. He named Derek as the person who had seen his potential and taken a chance on expanding the conversation. He said he was looking forward to what they were going to build together. He said it was a new chapter. He said he was genuinely grateful for the opportunity. The room was quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of agreement, the quiet of confusion, because most of the people in that room had already received the transition documents that included the ownership structure, and none of those documents listed Marcus anywhere. Derek was the only one in the room who had not yet fully understood what the calendar invite from Ackles meant. And so Derek was also quiet, but his quiet was not the same as everyone else's quiet. His quiet had a new understanding starting to form behind it. Ackles let Marcus finish. She did not interrupt him. She sat very still and she let every word land exactly where it landed. And then, when the silence after his announcement had stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, she folded her hands on top of her folder and she said in a completely calm and even voice that she wanted to congratulate Marcus on his enthusiasm, and then she introduced herself to the room as the principal owner of Carver and Holt as of 6 weeks prior. And she explained that while she appreciated Derek's work in building external relationships, any partnership decisions at the firm would be made through her office, and that no such offer had been formally extended or approved. Then she turned to look directly at Marcus and she said she was glad he was here because it saved her a phone call. Marcus's face did something she had never seen it do before. It went completely still, not relaxed, still, the way a body goes still when it has not yet figured out which response to produce. Meeting continued. It was professional and organized, and Ackles moved through the agenda with the precision she always brought to her work. Marcus sat through it. He did not leave, which she had half expected him to do. He sat through it and he listened, and he did not speak except once, when he asked a brief clarifying question that was clearly not about the content of the meeting but about trying to locate himself in the new reality that had just been handed to him. The meeting ended. People filed out. Derek stopped by Ackles's chair and apologized quietly for the confusion about the partnership discussion, and she accepted the apology graciously and told him she looked forward to working with him. And then it was just her and Marcus in the conference room. He sat across from her, and for a long moment he did not say anything. Then he said, "When were you going to tell me?" She looked at him steadily and said, "I just told you." He said that wasn't what he meant. She said she understood what he meant. He said he had been working on this for months, that Derek had told him this was essentially done, that he had already told their father. She took that last piece of information in carefully, and she said, "What did you tell Dad?" He said he had told Raymond that he was about to make partner at a firm in the city and that Raymond was proud. She looked at her hands for a moment. She looked back up at Marcus. Then she said, "That's going to be an interesting conversation." She did not say it with cruelty. She said it the way you say something when you see a consequence clearly and you are simply noting it out loud. Marcus looked at her like she was a stranger. And the strange thing, the thing Ackles carried with her in the days that followed, was that she was not sure he was entirely wrong about that. Because the Ackles who had sat through years of being minimized and overlooked and treated like the functional background character of the family story, that Ackles would have softened this moment. She would have found a way to let Marcus save face. She would have invented a reason to walk out of the room and let him collect himself without witnesses. The Ackles who had just bowed. A consulting firm and sat at the head of her own table, was a different version of the same woman, and that version was done performing disappearance. She drove home after the meeting and she called her friend Priya, who had known her for 15 years and who understood the full context of her family without needing to be caught up. Ackles told her what had happened step by step, and Priya was quiet for a while and then said, "How do you feel?" Ackles thought about it honestly. She said she did not feel triumphant. She did not feel angry. She felt something closer to tired and clear at the same time, like you feel when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and you have finally set it down, not because you wanted to drop it, but because your arms have simply reached the end of what they can hold. Priya said that sounded about right. Then she said she was proud of her. Ackles thanked her and ate leftover pasta and went to bed early. The call from Raymond came 2 days later. She had been expecting it. She had not been certain of the tone it would arrive in, but she had known it was coming. Her father called on a Thursday evening, and the call started with small talk, which was his way of testing the temperature before the actual subject arrived. He asked about her week. She said it was busy but good. He said he had heard some interesting news. She said she imagined he had. He said he had spoken to Marcus. She said she knew. And then Raymond said something that stopped her in a way she had not entirely prepared for, even knowing the conversation was coming. He said, "Ackles, you could have told him. You should have given him a heads up. He's your brother." She held the phone for a moment. She thought about all the times she had been the one who gave people heads up. She thought about the years of information she had offered freely to this family, the updates and the explanations and the softening of edges that she had done so that no one would feel blindsided, so that the family could function without friction, so that her father would not have to be uncomfortable and her brother would not have to be embarrassed. She thought about how many times that labor had been expected without being named. And then she said, "Dad, the firm was mine to disclose when I was ready. I had business reasons for a private transition. Marcus arrived at a meeting he was not invited to based on a conversation that was not yet formalized. I handled it professionally." Raymond was quiet. Then he said, "Your brother has been working towards something like this for a long time." Ackles said, "So have I." Raymond said, "It's not a competition." Ackles said, "I know it isn't. That's the point, Dad." She ended the call without resolution, which was how most of her calls with Raymond ended when the topic was Marcus. She sat in her kitchen for a while and she thought about the fact that her father had called not to congratulate her on purchasing a firm, which was an objectively significant professional achievement, but to ask her why she had not made the acquisition more comfortable for her brother. She turned that over in her mind a few times, looking at it from different angles, trying to find the one where it made sense and felt fair. She could not find it. The next 2 weeks were strange in the way that periods after long-standing family truths surface tend to be strange. There was no blow-up. There was no dramatic confrontation. There was instead a specific kind of family silence that Ackles had learned to read over the years. Her mother called twice, both times under the pretext of something else, both times steering toward the topic of Marcus near the end of the call. Her mother was gentler than Raymond about it. Sylvia said, "I know you've worked hard, sweetheart, and I'm proud of you, but you know how Marcus is about these things. Ackles said, "How is he about these things, Mom?" And Sylvia paused in the way she paused when she did not have an answer that would survive being said out loud. Then she said, "He's sensitive." Ackles said, "Yes." Silently she thought, "And I was not supposed to be." Marcus himself did not call for 11 days. When he did call, his voice had a quality to it that she recognized. It was the voice he used when he needed something but was trying to frame the conversation as something other than need. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. She said that was good to hear. He said he was not sure what he was supposed to do now, professionally. She said he had options and they were not hard to find given his experience. He said he had already told some people about the partnership. She said she understood that was awkward. He said, "More than awkward." He said, "Ackles, I look like an idiot." She said, "Marcus, that happened because you announced something that hadn't been confirmed. I didn't create that situation." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Could you reconsider? Could you actually bring me in?" She felt something move in her chest, something that was not surprise and was not anger and was not even sadness exactly. It was something that felt like the last piece of a pattern clicking completely into place. She said she would think about it. She meant that honestly. She was not dismissing him as a reflex. She genuinely intended to think about it. And she did for several days, and what she found when she examined the question carefully and honestly was that the answer was no, not yet, and possibly not ever in the way Marcus was imagining. Not because she needed to punish him, but because she had learned something important over the past several weeks. She had learned that her instinct to bring people in, to create room for people at her table, to soften her own position so that others could feel more comfortable in it, was a habit that had cost her in ways she was still counting. She did not owe Marcus a partnership at the firm she had built and purchased through her own work and capital simply because they shared a last name. She called him back 4 days later and she told him her decision clearly and without cushioning it. She said she was not in a position to offer him a partnership at this time. She said his experience would serve him well at other firms and she would be happy to serve as a professional reference when the time came. She said this without apology and without the usual trail of explanation she would have once added to make the no sound more like a maybe. Marcus said very little. He said okay. He said he understood. He said he hoped this was not about the past. She said it was about the present and the future, which was all she could honestly speak to. Then she said she loved him and she hoped his next step would be a good one, and then the call ended. In the weeks that followed, Ackles threw herself into the work of running the firm, and the work was demanding and absorbing and genuinely satisfying in the way that work feels when you are doing something that was always yours and you are finally just doing it openly. She spent long days meeting with staff, reviewing client relationships, meeting with their biggest accounts, and beginning the careful process of introducing herself as the new principal. Some clients were nervous at first, as clients always are when leadership changes. Most of them settled quickly once they worked with her directly and saw the quality and steadiness she brought. 2 new clients came in during the first month, referred by people who had worked with her previously. The staff stabilized faster than she had projected. The firm's numbers at the end of the first quarter were better than the previous years for the same period. She did not tell her family these numbers. She did not share monthly updates or milestones. She answered her parents' calls when they came and she asked about their lives and she told them she was well and the firm was doing well. She was not cold to them. She was not punishing them. She had simply stopped performing the version of herself that needed their acknowledgement in order to know her own value. Raymond called in the 3rd month with a different tone than the earlier calls. He called on a Sunday morning and his voice was quieter, less framed around a particular agenda. He asked how things were going and she told him genuinely and he listened in a way he did not always listen. At the end of the call he said, "I owe you something." She waited. He said he should have paid more attention. He said he realized in the weeks since everything had surfaced that he had expected a lot from her and acknowledged very little of it. He said he was not sure when that pattern had started, but he could see it clearly now and he was sorry. She sat with that for a moment. It was not a perfect apology. It was not a complete accounting of everything. But it was real, and Raymond did not produce real things easily, and she recognized it for what it was. She said she appreciated him saying that. She said it meant something to her. They talked for another 20 minutes about other things, comfortable things, and when she hung up she sat for a while in the quiet of her apartment, and she felt something that was not quite resolution but was close to it, something like the beginning of a true and honest renegotiation of what this relationship could be. Marcus took longer. He took several months, which did not surprise her. He moved to a different firm, a solid one across town, and he seemed to be doing well there in the way Marcus was always capable of doing when he was not trying to do something for the wrong reasons. He texted her in the 4th month, just a short text. It said, "I heard your first quarter went well. Congrats." She replied, "Thank you. How's the new role?" He said it was good. He said the culture was a good fit. She said she was glad to hear it. They left it there. It was not a resolution. It was not a reconciliation in any full sense, but it was honest, and honest was more than they had been with each other in a long time, possibly ever. Sylvia remained the connective tissue of the family in the way she always had been. She called regularly. She did not stop trying to smooth things over because that was simply who she was and she was too deep into her habits to change them entirely. But something in her had shifted too, in a small and genuine way. She started asking Ackles about the firm differently. Not politely interested questions, but real questions, the kind you ask when you actually want to understand the answer. She asked about a client situation Ackles had mentioned and then followed up about it the next time they spoke. She remembered the name of one of Ackles's key staff members and asked how he was settling in. It was not dramatic, it was small, but Ackles noticed it and stored it carefully, the way you store small good things when you have learned not to take them for granted. Rhea threw her a proper celebration dinner in the 5th month, a dinner Ackles had kept putting off because it felt self-indulgent and because she had been too busy and because some part of her was still recalibrating to the idea of allowing herself to be the person things were celebrated for. It was small, 6 people, all of them friends who had known her for years, people who understood what the achievement meant in context and not just on paper. They raised glasses. They said real things. Ackles sat at the head of that table too, a round table at a restaurant with good food and low lighting, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt like herself. The full version, the version that did not need to make herself smaller so that everyone else could stand tall. She thought about Marcus at the table briefly, not with bitterness but with something more complicated. She thought about how he had walked into that conference room with all his performance and his posture and his announced certainty, and how quickly the room had rearranged itself around the truth. She thought about how many years she had spent in rooms that rearranged themselves around Marcus while she held everything quietly together. She thought about her father and the phone call on the Sunday morning and the real words that had come out of him. She thought about her mother and the genuine questions. She thought about her firm and the work she was doing there, the results she was already producing, the direction she was taking it. She raised her glass with her friends and she drank and she laughed, and the evening was warm and full and hers entirely. There is something that Ackles understood by the end of that year that she had not been able to articulate when the year began. It was not a complicated thing, but like many simple things, it had taken a long time and a lot of experience to reach. The understanding was this: being the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who handles things without needing credit, those are genuine qualities and she was not ashamed of them. But she had made a mistake that she now saw clearly. She had confused being dependable with being invisible. She had told herself that her family saw her even when the evidence was consistently that they were too focused on someone else to look. She had given the people who overlooked her the benefit of the doubt so many times, and for so long that the benefit of the doubt had become the default position of the relationship, rather than the occasional grace note it should have been. She had been so careful not to make anyone uncomfortable with her needs that she had slowly taught them that she did not have needs at the same cost as everyone else's. The firm changed that, not because buying a firm transformed her personality, but because it created a situation that was undeniable and concrete and hers in a way that could not be reinterpreted. She had not waited for anyone's approval to move forward on the acquisition. She had not asked for the family's blessing or advice. She had done it on her own timetable for her own reasons, and she had done it well. And when the moment came when Marcus sat across from her in that conference room and the room held its breath, she had not collapsed into the old habit of making it easier for him. She had told the truth, calmly, professionally, and without apology. The Marcus situation was not resolved neatly. Life did not do that. He was still her brother. She still loved him in the way you love people you grew up alongside, which is complicated and durable and not the same as liking someone or approving of everything they have done. She did not need him to admit everything or apologize for everything to move forward. She needed to stop waiting for that before she allowed herself to stand fully in her own story, and she had stopped waiting. That was the quiet center of everything that had happened. She had stopped waiting. By the end of her first full year running Holt, the firm had grown its revenue by 19%. She had made 2 strategic hires, expanded 1 practice area, and signed 3 new enterprise clients. She had also, quietly and without announcement, made her first 2 internal partnership offers to 2 senior consultants who had been with the firm for years and had been waiting for leadership that would actually see them. They accepted immediately. The 3 of them had lunched together the day after the offers were signed, and it was one of the better lunches Ackles had in her adult life, not because of what the lunch represented professionally, but because of what it felt like to be in a room choosing people based entirely on merit and trust and mutual respect, with no history of performance or approval-seeking or family hierarchy complicating the air. She thought about what she would tell a younger version of herself if that were possible. She thought about the girl who had grown up making herself smaller in a loud house, who had learned early that dependability was valuable but overlooked, who had done the work and carried the weight and asked for very little in return and told herself that was a kind of strength. She would tell that girl that she was right, that it was a kind of strength. But she would also tell her that strength and invisibility are not the same thing and should not be allowed to become the same thing. She would tell her that the people who benefit from your quietness are not always the people who deserve it. She would tell her that making room for yourself is not the same as taking room from someone else, and that anyone who tells you otherwise is protecting their own access to the space you have been vacating for them. She would tell her to keep the work ethic and the depth of feeling and the loyalty, but to apply those things to herself as generously as she had applied them to others. She would tell her that the table you build is yours. The following spring, Ackles sat in a different conference room in the same building where she had signed the acquisition papers. This room had a window that looked over the street below. The city was doing what cities do in the spring, blossoming and loud and indifferent to any individual story happening inside it. She was reviewing projections for the next fiscal year with her two new partners. The numbers were good. The pipeline was strong. The culture of the firm was exactly what she had believed it could be when she had looked at it with her careful eyes and seen not just what it was but what it was capable of becoming. Her phone buzzed on the table. She turned it over briefly. It was a text from Marcus. It said, "Heard you're expanding." "Good for you, Ackles." She looked at it for a moment. She put the phone face down again. She looked at her partners, two people who had earned their seats at her table, and she said, "Where were we?" They told her. She smiled and they kept working. That was the whole of it. Not a fairy tale, not a perfect accounting, not a story where every wrong was righted and every person who had caused harm was made to pay in some visible and satisfying way. It was a true kind of story, which is to say it was complicated and ongoing and human. It was the story of a woman who had spent years being the most capable person in a room that kept crediting someone else, and who had finally stopped making that easier for everyone. Who had stopped dimming herself to keep the lights comfortable for the people around her. Who had bought a firm and sat at the head of a table and said her name clearly without asking anyone's permission to do so. That woman was Ackles, and that table was hers, and she had earned every inch of it. If Ackles' story stayed with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever built something quietly, something real and earned, only to have someone walk into it and try to make it about them? Have you ever been the dependable one for so long that people forgot you had a limit? Tell me where you are in your story, because I think a lot of people watching this are somewhere inside of Ackles' experience right now, and this community is the right place to say it out loud.